Thank you, Acting Deputy President. And I rise today to speak about monetary policy and the need to reform our monetary policy system. That I will be presenting a number of new policies I think that are needed to reform our system. But let me say that monetary policy is the key to a nation's sovereignty. Any country that uses foreign debt to fund its way of life is doomed to destroy itself. And for too long, our RBA has allowed foreign debt to control our markets and dominate our capital markets instead of using domestic equity. And that starts within the government itself. Now, if I was to stand here today and say that I wanted to introduce a private member's bill that was going to block private companies from issuing new capital, I'd be rightly laughed out of the chamber. But yet that is the attitude we have towards our own government when it comes to building infrastructure. Now, the 1937 Banking Royal Commission, which was actually indeed one of the members on that Royal Commission was Ben Chifley, the former Labor Prime Minister, recommended that the central bank must always control the volume of credit in the system. And that is something that in 1985 Paul Keating, when he relaxed capital controls, threw under the bus. And I'm sure Ben Chifley must be rolling in his grave. Because what has happened since then, in 1985, the four major banks had $8 billion in foreign debt. By 2008, they had $800 billion in foreign debt. And that basically was lent against housing, which of course increased the price of housing to double the price of houses relative to income. And of course that has led to much poverty and hardship amongst hard-working Australians. Now, if we want to deal with capital in this country, we have to stop relying just on the one monetary policy lever of qualitative easing, i.e. where we change the price of money on the first Tuesday of every month. Listening to the discussion amongst the major parties talking about how many boards the RBA has got or should have is like shuffling deck chairs on the Titanic. Instead of talking about qualitative easing and how many boards the RBA should have, we need to look at two other levers that are very important when it comes to managing monetary policy. And one is quantitative easing through the use of infrastructure bonds, which from a government perspective is no different to a private company issuing new shares, because if you have equity in a company, you're entitled to issue new shares to raise new money. As a sovereign country, we have title over this country. We are entitled to issue new shares via the form of infrastructure bonds against 7 sovereign assets, and they are dams, power stations, road, rail, ports, airports and telecommunications. If we were to set up an infrastructure bank in this country, which is one of the policies I'm proposing, the infrastructure bank could then lend or issue infrastructure bonds to the state and federal government to build that much-needed critical infrastructure. And we need to use that method because that way we retain the wealth generated from those assets in this country. If, for example, what we do currently is if we want to build a dam for $1 billion, we will go and source that $1 billion in foreign debt offshore. That means the first $1 billion we make in wealth from that dam has to be repaid offshore. And given, if you're lucky, you might repay that debt 25 years at 4%. That's another $1 billion in interest that gets repaid offshore. So at least 200% of the cost of capital goes offshore because we pay another country to use their printing press. And that type of capital management is doomed to impoverish our children. Our forefathers fought for that right, that untapped wealth in this country. It is wealth for toil. We have title over that untapped wealth and we have to retain it here. But not only should we have a new infrastructure bank or have an infrastructure bank as part of our monetary policy, we should also restore a public bank and a government insurance office. Since the CBA was privatised, we have seen an alarming number of bank branches closed, not just in the regions, but in metropolitan areas as well. And there are many sectors of the community that relies on bank branches to do their banking, whether it be for cash, whether it be for face-to-face services. You know, our regional communities, our retirees, they don't want to use internet banking. And I think that banking is an essential service, and like health and education, we should have private banks by all means, but we should have a public bank as a backstop. The other thing we also need is a government insurance office. Since the state governments privatised their insurance offices, we have seen insurance premiums rise by double-digit figures year on year. We have seen many Australians unable to obtain insurance. I would rather have a government insurance office than waste $10 billion on a reinsurance pool that will end up in the pocket of foreign multinationals.
Authorised G. Rennick People First Chermside.